Good evening, everybody. Thanks for waiting on there. We were just inviting a few people to join us and getting all set up at our end. And a huge welcome to everyone who's joined us online tonight. Thank you for taking the time to do that. I'm Linda Somerville. I'm the Deputy General Secretary, or one of them, here at the STUC, Scotland's Trade Union Centre. And I'm delighted to introduce tonight's event and welcome you all to it. Tonight's event is actually one of our Youth Committee events from the STUC Youth Committee, and we'll be hearing from the Chair of the Youth Committee tonight as well. And one of the reasons they wanted to put this on in May was to actually celebrate International Workers' Day and to celebrate May Day, but not around the time of May, later in the month, but just taking time to reflect on some of the most important issues that we face, not just in the UK, but internationally, and how workers can come together, how trade unionists can support each other, and what international solidarity actually means in practice. So that's what we were looking to do this evening, and we've got a great lineup of speakers. I'm absolutely delighted with the people that are attending both online tonight and to speak to you, not just from the UK, but from other places as well. So I'm hoping, we've had a couple of technical difficulties, but I'm hoping that we've now resolved it and that we should have our first speaker with us. So let me just check if we have. I understand that that's probably okay. So let me just try. The first speaker that we've got with us tonight, and she can join us for the first half hour of the meeting. We are absolutely delighted to welcome the new Cuban ambassador to the UK, Her Excellency Ismara Mercedes Vergas Walter, who's joining us online, and she's going to outline for us some of the issues for both the current political and economic situation in Cuba, the challenges of the Cuban people, and importantly, how trade unionists in Britain, in Scotland, and around the world can show their solidarity. So if Her Excellency is there, then I'm going to ask if she can join us online now.
Linda, I think she's still struggling to join.
Okay. What I'll do then is I'm going to ask Josh Morris, who's the chair of our youth committee, to say a bit about tonight's session and about the work that the youth committee have been doing. And then after that, we'll hopefully hear from Her Excellency. Thank you. Josh.
Thanks, Linda. So as Linda said, I'm this year's chair of the STUC Youth Committee. It's a privilege to speak at this event tonight alongside such inspiring speakers. On behalf of the STUC Youth Committee, I'd like to extend our sincere gratitude to each of you for joining us and contributing to this important event. I'm filled with immense pride and a sense of duty, knowing that we are gathered here to discuss a cause that transcends borders and unites workers worldwide: international solidarity. In our globalised world, the concept of solidarity is more vital than ever. A workplace challenge, it's an opportunity, a call to action for all of us to stand together and fight for the rights and dignity of every worker, everywhere. As young trade unionists, we're the future of the labour movement. Our generation must seize the opportunity to reshape and reinvigorate this movement with fresh perspectives and renewed energy. Young workers in Scotland understand that the world extends far beyond the Carlisle border and does not vanish at the edge of the Shetland Isles. The challenges we face today are part of a broader global workforce experience. They are deeply interconnected and deeply entrenched. Young workers around the world share struggles against insecure employment, precarious housing, climate change, and the threats posed by advancing technologies such as AI. And we stand at the start of an election campaign. It is evident that the two major parties vying for power regard us as nothing more than pawns. They either take us for granted, assuming our unwavering support without any meaningful engagement around the issues harming our quality of life, or dismiss us entirely, neglecting our voices and concerns, and using us as a headline-grabbing bogeyman with gimmicks such as national service. This cynical approach to electioneering isn't new or surprising, but it offers no response to the pressing issues that young workers confront daily. We refuse to be reduced to mere tokens in a political game. We demand genuine representation and policies that prioritise our well-being, and if we aren't going to get them via the ballot box, we will fight for them in our workplaces and communities. While national borders may shift and become more fortified, they do not hinder the freedom of movement enjoyed by corporations whose ownership and influence span continents. To effectively challenge these global entities, we too must work across borders. Over recent times, we have seen examples in Scotland of local actions embracing a global perspective. Significantly, these actions have often been led by young workers in under-organised sectors of our economy. Consider the efforts of Unite Hospitality, who initiated their Serve Solidarity campaign in late last year. This campaign aims to offer assistance to hospitality workers as they coordinate workplace boycotts against companies complicit in Israeli apartheid. Unite Hospitality calls on venues and suppliers throughout the city to join the boycott against companies highlighted by the BDS campaign. Already, this campaign has achieved some notable successes, pressuring changes in suppliers at various Glasgow venues. Moreover, the campaign is hosting a benefit concert next week to raise funds in support of sending surgeons to Gaza. This is workers organising not just for themselves, but in solidarity with the people of Palestine. Or take the efforts of Apple Store workers in Glasgow, who celebrated a landmark achievement with the first trade union recognition agreement in a UK Apple Store. This was a monumental victory for Apple workers who stood on one of the world's world's largest tech companies and most recognisable brands. However, the significance of this victory extends beyond the struggles of the workers in that single store. It was achieved through a global network of Apple workers who collaborated and supported each other in tactics and solidarity. This victory underscores the importance of mutual support and understanding among workers worldwide in challenging corporate giants and gaining a say over the distribution of the immense profits they generate. Young people are increasingly acknowledging the pivotal role they play in sustaining the mechanisms of the world, yet they are also increasingly refusing to continue doing so under the current conditions. Solidarity is, of course, not without risk, which is why it is crucial for us to continue building our movement and actively engaging young workers. The challenges we face are formidable, but our collective strength and unity can overcome them. By standing together and supporting each other, we can create meaningful change and ensure that workers' rights are upheld globally. I hope that today's discussions and experiences will leave us with a renewed sense of determination. Let us take this momentum forward, inspiring and mobilising the next generation of trade unionists to join our cause. Together, we can build a future where solidarity transcends borders and every worker's voice is heard. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh, for outlining not only just the reasons why your youth committee wanted to go ahead with tonight's session, but some of the really positive things that we've seen. All too often we think that the work that trade unions do, when we've actually quite rightly been defending workers' rights and making sure people are on strike for better pay rises, but some of the organising that's been done on the ground, as you say, the examples you've given about Apple and other examples where you've got young workers particularly moving into new areas and taking forward trade union solidarity. So thank you for that. Colleagues, I'm delighted to say that we've now got Her Excellency who has managed to join us this evening. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that. We're so looking forward to hearing from you. I do understand that you're stuck for time this evening, so thank you. We really appreciate it. I'm Linda Somerville from the STUC. I'm the Deputy General Secretary, and as I said earlier, tonight's event, we really wanted to put on a range of speakers talking about what the issues are around that workers are dealing with in different parts of the world, but what is trade union solidarity and how we can help. So we're looking forward to hearing from you really about the current situation in Cuba, the economic and political challenges, the opportunities that there are, how Cuban people have responded, and really what trade unionists can do in Scotland to help. So thank you, Your Excellency, and over to you.
I thank you. I thank you for having me tonight. And as you said, I arrived in the UK very recently, and it's quite an honor for me to take part of this meeting. And we are here to share our views, as you said, on the current situation in Cuba, in particular as a result of the impact of the measures that take part of the economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed by the United States against Cuba. The blockade in this sense, and this is important to be streamlined, continues to be the central element of the US policy towards Cuba. The effects of this undeclared war, they call it embargo, but it's indeed an undeclared war, on the economy, society, and daily life and dreams of over 11 million persons in Cuba. These effects are, in fact, immeasurable. Biden administration has left untouched the measures adopted during the Trump administration. And in this connection, it's important for us to understand the extent of this policy that over 80% of the Cuban current population has never experienced something different to the blockade. That means that was born and lives and have been raised under this policy and the harmful effects of this policy. In particular, the impact of such a cruel policy has a remarkable impact in the public health sector. Purchases of the supplies needed by Cuba to sustain the public health, which, as you know, is free for all, have been severely affected by the cancellation of contracts and also the rising marketing cost and growing pressure on the banks worldwide. This is especially difficult because of the implementation of the relisting of Cuba as a so-called state sponsor of terrorism. In recent years, dozens of suppliers around the world have suspended their dealings with Cuba. The results have included unprecedented difficulties for the pharmaceutical industry. Such severe limitations undermine the quality of the public services with a direct impact in the national health indicators. Some of the examples we are in the position to share are that currently 20,000 Cuban families are waiting for diagnosis of genetic diseases. It has not been possible to provide adequate care because the necessary technology uses over 10% of US components. Hence, this technology is forbidden for Cuba because of the blockade. JASCO, a Japanese company that manufactures spare parts for laboratory equipment, has refused to sell Cuba because of its inclusion in the so-called list of state sponsors of terrorism. Several banks have also refused to operate with Cuba because of their listing of our country in such a group. And we all know that it's baseless and it's also undeserved. There are no grounds for the US government to include Cuba in that list. Another example is that 3 Swiss banks refused to transfer donations to Cuba from the solidarity organization Medicuba, Switzerland. And those contributions were intended for the purchase of surgical instrumentation for burns and reconstructive surgery. These are very delicate issues that we are facing as we speak, and that is in addition to the hardships in our daily lives, to the shortage of power, electricity, because of the lack of availability of fuel in our country for very basic needs that our population has. In addition to Cuba's efforts, we have received solidarity support from different countries around the world. I have to say that the UK has been a champion in this connection, and for many years, trade unions here in the UK have traditionally played a key role in the fight against the blockade, and also promoting solidarity and sharing with other persons here in the UK the reality of Cuba, for people to understand what we really live and avoid that those people are carried away by the propaganda, especially from the US newspapers. My predecessors and my team here at the embassy have explained to me the long-standing relationships, in particular with the STUC. And that's why I'm very happy tonight to have this meeting with you all. And also, we are very hopeful with the fact that future generations in STUC will be also involved in these solidarity activities for my country. Fighting against the blockade, understanding the reality of Cuba is a matter of justice. Fighting against the blockade and be side by side with Cuba, as you've been doing for a long time, it's also a matter of decency. That's why we thank you so much, and we are open here and ready to continue working with you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us this evening. And just a couple of brief reflections. I mean, you touched there on some of the problems that the embargo, as they call it, has had on Cuba, and particularly around healthcare. And yet, you know, I think it's remarkable when we look at what the Cuban establishment, what you've done around healthcare. I mean, you have one of the highest doctor-to-patient ratios in the world. And people need to, you know, consider how that can be used as a model for other countries to follow, and the emphasis that I know that you have on preventative medicine as well. So I think it's, you know, there's so much that I think other countries can learn. And also we have to therefore think, when Cuba has actually managed to achieve that, and the educational attainment that you have in the population in terms of literacy and higher education as well, not just about basic literacy, but higher education. When Cuba has achieved that, when you have had so much against you, imagine what we could do if Cuba truly had the support that it needed and the economic power to do what it needed. I know personally, visiting Cuba almost 30 years ago during the special period in around the mid-1990s, I was astounded by the innovation and by the commitment of Cuban people there, and also by the response that we had when visiting, where people were so welcomed that they knew that they were supported, and it was evident to them that they had support from other people in the world. So thank you so much for sharing that this evening. And I say you will have a continued support from trade unionists in Scotland. If there's anything specific that you want trade unions to do and our members to do, then please ask. We will stand beside you in solidarity and do so.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Colleagues, I'd like to move on now and say that for our next speaker, we are joined for a truly international event this evening, that we have with us joining from Santiago, I think in Chile this evening. We have our very acclaimed author, writer, and who needs no introduction to many of you here. I mean, Vijay was just telling us that he was last in Scotland during COP, and was also, it was noted that he was in several bars in Glasgow during that time, I think we just mentioned as well. So, you know, Vijay is going to join us tonight, and we've asked Vijay Prasad to come along, particularly to talk about some of the challenges that there are internationally, some of the work that he's been doing, obviously from Tricontinental and from other organisations that he's involved in, where he has a very much truly an international role, reflection on solidarity movements that there are. And I know, Vijay, that you were recently giving a lecture also to the Tricontinental supported movement, education centre in Brazil, for the Battle of the Ideas. We're looking at really the people that were there from all different parts of the world coming together to say, how do we begin to progress and learn from each other? So the floor is yours, Vijay, and I would love to hear from you. You've got around up to 25 minutes. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Linda. It's a great pleasure to be with you. And I want to really thank Josh and others in the youth sector for holding this meeting. It's absolutely important in this time of the genocidal war that the Israelis are prosecuting against the Palestinian people, that we gather together. And I'm going to make some remarks about that in a little bit, but very much grateful to the young people, young trade unionists, for putting solidarity, particularly international solidarity, at the center. And long may you do so, Josh. International solidarity is what makes a trade union from a union that fights
Hmm?
for the workers in that shop to a union that fights to make the world a place for human beings, which is the purpose, in a sense, of trade unionism. So bravo, bravo to the young trade unionists. I just want to say I'm very grateful to have listened to the ambassador. Next month, Noam Chomsky and I are releasing a book called On Cuba, which is our very brisk account of US imperialism and the attempt to suffocate the Cuban Revolution. I'm looking forward to coming to Scotland to talk about that book. I'll be in London in September. I hope to see the ambassador and hand her a copy of the book in person. It's a defense of the Cuban Revolution, but really it's about the barred teeth of the reactionaries who govern in Washington and have done so for a very long time with their, shall we call them what they are, their poodles in at number 10 Downing Street, who bark when asked to and bark ferociously sometimes. They are not so weak as to bark lightly. They are pretty ferocious people down at 10 Downing Street. You know, the world is in such a place, friends, that the political leaders in charge, whether it's Rishi Sunak, Olaf Scholz, Joe Biden, whoever it might be, these political rulers have made choices for us over the generations. You know, right now, global military spending annually is at a minimum $2.5 trillion a year, minimum. You see, anytime you go up to a government, whether it's the Scottish Parliament, or you go to Westminster, or you go anywhere, any government in this world, and say, you know what, we have children starving. There are children starving in our cities in Scotland, in our small towns. Children are not able to eat. Our schools are crumbling. There's not enough chairs in the schools and so on. They turn around and they say to us, well, you know, we just don't have the funds. We don't have the funds. Well, there's two reasons why they really don't have the funds. One is they basically let the rich off from paying taxes. There's been a global tax strike. You know, we think of strikes as something that workers go on. But listen, the bosses go on strike all the time. They have been on a long-term strike, refusing to pay taxes collectively as a class. As a class, they are on strike. They refuse to pay tax. They have blackmailed their own governments. They're starving their own governments. I mean, the Conservative government in the UK, 14-year government, that's the government of the bosses. You know, it doesn't even pretend to be a government of the people. It's a government of the bosses. And yet the bosses are starving their own government. They're refusing to pay taxes to their own government. Having shrunk the tax base by this tax strike, long-term tax strike, in fact, a 50-year tax strike from the 1970s onward, having shrunk the revenues coming into government, they then put pressure on these very governments who they are not putting in their fair tax share of tax into. So the bosses are not financing their own governments, and yet they pressure these governments, the bosses' governments, to make choices that are even more anti-people. So not only do they not fund them, but then they force them to make anti-people choices. One of the great anti-people choice is to divert a vast amount of social wealth to the military. I mean, look at the debate taking place in Europe, including the United Kingdom. Members of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization lift military spending to 2% of GDP. Some countries eager to go to 3%. Some even talking about a 5% threshold. I mean, the waste of your resources that go into BAE systems, taxpayer subsidized arms companies that go into Lockheed Martin, that go into other Boeing and so on, that manufacture weapons in Scotland. For instance, the F-15 sighting system manufactured in Edinburgh, manufactured in Scotland, weapons to destroy parts of the world. They have made a choice. They would firstly not finance governments, they shrink the revenue base, and secondly, they force them through all kinds of fantasy issues of security. What security? If I'm a worker and my children can't eat properly, my primary security is the food security of my family, not hiring 50 more police officers to patrol the streets. My first security is the food security of my family, not the security of the police or the security of F-16 jets flying over my head going to bomb young children in Gaza. My children can't eat, and the children in Gaza can't eat. That's international solidarity, friends. And they have made a choice, you see. The bosses, governments have made a choice that they would rather spend our resources on security, whether it's manufacturing arms or hiring more police officers, than dealing with our proximate problems. People cannot afford to pay rent or buy houses. They don't have access to credit. But somehow big corporations always get access to credit. These are political choices. This is not the science of economics. You see, they will then bamboozle us. They'll send an economist with graphs and charts to say, you don't understand. There's no money in the coffers. That's because you've let the bosses go on tax strike. Then they say, you don't understand. We need to increase the growth rate. The most effective way of increasing the growth rate is by the military multiplier. Put money into the military, and that is going to have multiplication results in the economy. But so does the multiplier work if you build high-speed rail. I took the train from London to Edinburgh. It's quite a delightful train. But my God, the trains move at a glacial speed. You need high-speed rail in the UK. In Scotland, you need high-speed rail. You know, in between Beijing and Shanghai, the train goes at 300 kilometers an hour, high-speed rail. Look at the rail services in the UK and look at the choices made by the government. They cancel a high-speed train, not even high-speed, sorry, medium-speed train to go to Manchester. And that too, they cancelled it at the Conservative conference. What a place to cancel it. They're cancelling trains, but increasing military spending. These are political choices. No economist with no number of degrees can convince me that that's a good idea. That the military multiplier is more important than dealing primarily with the choices of enabling people to live decent lives, both in Scotland and in Gaza or in Yemen. Scotland was sending so many weapon systems to the Saudis from which those weapons bombed children in Yemen. Where was the outcry? $2.5 trillion. Out of that, 75% of global military spending is spent by the NATO plus countries. 75%. The Chinese spent 10% of global military spending. The Russians about 3.5%. Your media, including the so-called media BBC, says that Russia and China are the great threats to the planet. Combined military spending of these two countries, about 14%. 75% of world military spending is the United States-led NATO plus bloc, includes the United Kingdom. You tell me, friends, who is the greatest military threat to the world? Is it the country that spends 10% of the world military spending and tries to defend its borders? Or is it the United Kingdom, which sends its ships into the South China Sea to harass the Chinese? How many Chinese ships are coming near Fife and coming near the oil rigs, your oil rigs in the North Sea? None. Zero Chinese military vessels in the North Sea. But the Queen Elizabeth military attack group was in the South China Sea. That's a choice. Your political leaders are making choices. You have to change the balance of forces to make different choices. That's the real international solidarity. International solidarity isn't the Scottish trade union movement sending food to Gaza, although that is a very important part of our immediate solidarity. The real solidarity is to build the movement to change the balance of power in the United Kingdom, to build the movement to change the balance of power. Because solidarity is not about charity. Solidarity is not charity. Solidarity is about political choices. If your government spent less on the military and more on dealing with the actual needs of people in the UK, then your government will not have the means to go out there and bully people and destroy the planet. That choice of allowing your government to export weapons, BAE Systems at the lead, the choice of allowing your government to export weapon systems, build up its military, is a choice of imperialism and war. And the way to undo that in the long term or medium term is to build your power so that different choices are made in the United Kingdom and BAE Systems is put out of business, and instead you have a company with the same skills producing light rail, high-speed light rail, producing better infrastructure for the UK. You see, when people say, oh my God, we can't close down BAE Systems, what about all those jobs? The classic defense by the bosses. That's when the bosses start worrying about workers' jobs. When we say shut down a weapons factory, then they say, what about the jobs? Any other factory, they shut down cruelly and say, we don't care about the workers. But when we make the argument and we say, shut down BAE Systems, don't export weapons to Yemen, the bosses come back and say, oh, we care about the workers. Really? Yesterday you shut down all these other factories, machine tools companies, shut down like this. You didn't even give people a severance. You just showed them the rear door and said, we'll frisk you on the way out because we don't even want you to take out a hammer. And now you're telling me when we say shut down, but we're not even saying shut it down. We're saying convert it. The UK's infrastructure is crumbling. Don't blow up bridges. Build them. Stop blowing up bridges. Learn to build bridges. And I mean build bridges both really repair your bridges. I worry for them, and build bridges to the world. The way to get to know the world isn't to go and destroy it. Rory Stewart wrote a ridiculous book about his time in Afghanistan. How it sounded like an old British imperial officer in Afghanistan, his book. Get to know the Afghans. You don't need to know them from the other side of a machine gun. It's not a great way to build solidarity or humanity. Okay, that's not the way you do it. So, just to try to put everything together, because I can go for hours on this, Josh, this is a deeply personal thing. I feel it in my bones, this whole thing about the choices made by these governments. It angers me, you see. That's why I can speak at length about this. And this is the thing I want to end on, this thing about emotion. It's just horrible what is happening in Gaza. It is beyond horrible. I was so proud of the Irish people, for putting up the Palestinian flag outside the Irish Parliament. My heart, when I saw those photographs and videos, when I saw my friend Declan Kearney of Sinn Féin stand up in the Dáil and give a speech about this, my heart was really feeling amazed. I felt so good. I felt so good. I felt in Red Clydeside, will they put up Palestinian flags? Will the Scottish Parliament, have a thing? Because I am so upset and angry. When the Rafah tent massacre took place, I felt sick. When the flower massacre took place, I've reported wars for years. Iraq, Syria, Libya, and so on. I've been to Gaza twice. Horrendous violence visited upon the Palestinians. Horrendous. And this is what I'm trying to wrap up to say. We can't have a bloodless attitude in this fight, comrades, friends. We have to allow our emotions to be part of it. We can't be bloodless. I am angry and I'm upset at the same time. We have to fight triply hard against the terrible, ugly choices governments make. We have to fight triply hard. We have to go amongst people. Each one of us have to become 100. We have to go amongst our memberships. We have to talk about solidarity not as something to do with other people, but to do with us. You see, our needs cannot be met if our governments are out there destroying the world. Our needs cannot be met. You can't fight in a narrow way for rising wages in a factory if your government is importing inflation through reckless wars against the Russians. You can't deal with rising, you can't fight in a factory to have better wages. It's not going to solve your problems. We need more. We have to demand more. We have to be hungry for more, but we also have to allow our emotions there. The world is becoming a sicker and sicker place unless we fight like hell to humanize it. And trade unions are so key because the humanizing of the world cannot happen by ideas alone. They must happen by the mass of people. And trade unions play such a key role in organizing the mass of people. Change the political choices, build power, learn to build bridges and not blow them up. Thanks a lot.
AJ, thank you. Huge thanks for that. You're getting quite a lot of applause around here. So a huge thanks for putting those points to us. And I think really just, we've still got another 10 minutes that I've wanted to chat to you. So if you've got another few minutes to hold on, what I was hoping to say was, you know, you've given us some reflections there on not only the political elite and how they use both the economic language and some of the structures that they already have to try and disempower people and make sure that they can actively come together to both be educated and understand and challenge some of that narrative. But you've also talked to us very explicitly about how emotion fits into that and why we all have a responsibility to build solidarity in different ways. You talked about really, you know, the changes in terms of how we can move away from whether it's arms manufacture or indeed making sure that governments and those in power begin to decrease on their defence budget, but sort of calling it a defence budget is ridiculous anyway. It's not about defence, you know, as you pointed out. So, I mean, one of the things, Britain's got a long history, obviously, in terms of workers coming together to look at this, all the way back to the most evidenced and documented being around the Lucas Plan, where workers can actually sit down and say, how do they want their own transition for their jobs to become? What can they use their skills and their knowledge to become something else? And in the STUC, we've been very actively involved in promoting a just transition for workers, whether that's away from fossil fuel or for any other industries, to make sure that we know that workers, that will be both worker-led in terms of them doing it and not someone else telling them that that's what they should be doing, and that we can support them to do that. I'm interested as well in your discussion about emotion and how we bring that in, because all too often when we talk about, you know, organising or when we talk about building workers' power, it's done on a theoretical basis, and it's not always around how we connect with people. And ultimately, organising, in my experience, and I'm sure many others, organising is about relationships. It's about building relationships and therefore trust, where people will come with you on a journey for whatever that is, for the aim that you're trying to achieve. So I completely agree with you, and we need to kind of get a bit better at thinking about what is an emotional response, not just in terms to the anger and the outrage that we feel, and the sadness that we feel at some of what we see in the world, but also in about how we connect with others to build that movement. So my question, I suppose, really is, you know, as a writer and someone who is, you know, established throughout the world in terms of your own teachings, What role do you see that education has in that? And I don't just mean formal education, but when we look at other alternative models of education, how do we see the role of education, particularly, but not always for young people, but also within trade unions? How can we get better at that? What would you recommend? And where have you seen solidarity movements in response to the challenges we have just now? Where are they best placed for us to learn from just now?
Linda, far be it for me to tell you any of these things, because the first question, if we had more time, if I visited you, I would ask you, what does the political education look like in the Scottish trade union movement? You know, different unions will have different traditions of political education and so on. So everything I'm saying right now is not a reflection of anything to do with the Scottish situation, but a generalized understanding of my own work as a young trade union organizer in India, and my experience of meeting trade unions around the world. So that's my preface for these remarks. You know, one of the things I found, particularly after the fall of the Soviet Union, I was a member of I was an organizer in a trade union, you know, around the time the Soviet Union collapsed. And what collapsed with it in a way was the collapse of the political education I should have received. So what happened was, for a long period of time, I was organizing with no idea why I was organizing. Like, what were we organizing toward? We were organizing work, you know, campaigns around shops, like, you know, working conditions, or organizing around, say, grievances, this particular worker's grievance and so on. But what was the horizon? And I saw a lot of young people start to leave the movement in the 1990s because they were just getting exhausted by what looked to be like spinning wheels. You know, you're doing so much grievance work. What's the bigger picture? Like, why am I at work as a trade unionist for 18 hours a day, 15 hours a day? I'm trying to fight for an 8-hour day for the workers. I'm working a 15-hour day. To what end? And it's political education that actually educates you about your role in the whole struggle. And I think that is a very key thing we sometimes forget. And particularly once the Soviet Union collapsed, when there was anxiety among our ranks about, well, what are we fighting for? You know, are we fighting for Blairite socialism? Is that really what, or Blairite anti-socialism? Is that really the horizon of possibility? And so on. So that's one thing that I would say. A lot of places, trade unions, political movements allowed political education for our own cadre and membership to decline. And I don't know, again, what the status is in Scotland, but in many parts of the world, there was a decline. So I think that's extremely important. Secondly, related to that, because I've been involved with the landless workers movement in Brazil, where they have a school in building up the curriculum of the ENFF. That's where the Battle of Ideas class was held. It develops ideas from Paulo Freire and so on. I think educating our own people to understand that to be a trade unionist or to be a person in a political party is to be a teacher, is to lead with people. You are, in a sense, tasked not to go and knock on a door and tell people things. You are tasked to become a teacher for everybody, you know, to learn and teach at the same time. This structure of teaching trade unionists to become teachers of their community is such an important part of, I think, our movement. And it's not a question of leaflet handing. It's a question of being confident with our ideas. And for that, I think the sense of going back to the root is important. That's why I talked about choices. You know, it's about choices. It's not about the science of economics. You know, it's a choice. Like, for instance, Scottish Enterprise. Scottish Enterprise spends government money to subsidize arms companies. Why should a foundation, a government foundation, or why should the Scottish government be subsidizing arms companies which are making obscene profits? You know, that's a political choice. And part of our role as you know, as let's call it popular educators, is to go among the people to fight against the educational systems, what the formal education systems have taught people. Because the formal education systems are teaching people effectively the boss's point of view. And the great work of trade unions over the last 150 years has been as teachers of the workers' point of view in our own communities, because our own people are given the boss's viewpoint on things like, well, we need to save the jobs of this, this dock which makes nuclear submarines. You don't need to save the workers' jobs there. You need to save jobs and livelihoods and build community, but not like that. I mean, it's an incredible thing. Why then are these same people, let's say, against drug sellers on the street corner? Let's save the job of the drug seller on the street corner. You consider that illegal, but you don't consider blowing up 500 children, killing 15,000 children illegal. That's legal. How is that better than some kid who sells drugs on the corner? You see, so this is the role of the popular educator. And who is the popular educator? The popular educator is what Antonio Gramsci called the permanent persuader. Who's the permanent persuader? It's you. It's you, Josh. You are the permanent persuader. When you go among the people as young trade unionists, you have to have the confidence to stand there at the root and talk to people about the choices made in our name using our wealth. It's not somebody else's wealth. It's our wealth. And that's the work we have to do in consciousness to bring people along with us, to accompany people and let them accompany us in the struggle. So I am an enormous advocate, Linda, of political education in our ranks. Not just we educate others, in our ranks. Because I feel often we don't properly train our own people, and our own people don't have a proper understanding of what the hell they're doing when they go from worker to worker building, say, a vote for a union contract. Why are we doing that? You're doing that because you want to change the choices being made in our name with our wealth, and you want to produce a much better society.
Thank you, Vijay. That was an inspiring response to that. And I think you covered all the points. I mean, huge thanks to you for joining us tonight. I think your points about political education, we've been doing a lot of work in Scotland around tax reform and trying to get the Scottish Government onto a better page about tax reform. We're making, we had some success in that, and they did introduce a marginal new rate of tax last year. But, what we really want to use that work on tax reform to ask those big questions. Who owns wealth? How did they get it? And how do we get it back? So, these are the questions that we really need to be beginning to use that tax paper and the research that we've done, not just to lobby politicians, but to take to people to say there is wealth in this country and that we're told all the time there isn't, but we actually need to look at how do we distribute that? How did they get it in the first place? And who did they most times steal it from? So no, thank you so much for coming along and joining us tonight. It's been an absolute pleasure. And in terms of being educational and inspirational, then you've certainly done that for the comrades that are online tonight. So thank you, Vijay.
Okay, let's win, guys. Let's win. We can't afford to lose. Let's win. Bye.
Okay, we've got a couple of other speakers this evening, so hopefully everyone can stay for that. No less inspirational, in fact, actually even more so, because our next speaker is Pauline Rourke from the CWU, and Pauline's going to tell us about some of the work that she's been doing, both on behalf of the STUC and the wider movement, to support garment workers in Sri Lanka specifically. So over to Pauline. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you for that very generous introduction. I really don't know if I could put myself up there with Her Excellency and Vijay, because, as you say, absolutely inspirational, fantastic contributions. And really, to echo what Vijay was saying, and yourself, Linda, was a massive thanks to Josh and the STUC Youth Committee for hosting this event tonight. I think it is so essential, so important, and at a particularly important time internationally, because we really are facing so many different issues, and we as trade unionists, I feel, have to be at the heart of it. And I really do appreciate the opportunity to just really give a very brief overview of, I suppose, first of all, Linda, and through the STUC, about my journey and how I actually was privileged enough to attend Sri Lanka. And it was in November 2022, and the invitation came from the organisation War on Want. During the year I was president of the STUC, and it was really aimed at our General Secretary, Ros Foyer. Ros was unable to attend at that time and gave me the opportunity. And as I say, I say it and I stand by it. It was life-changing. It was inspirational to be one of 7 of a delegation, to go to Sri Lanka with War on Want, members of Unite, Unison, the TUC, and we actually had a member of the Clean Clothes campaign. So it was a quite eclectic mix of us. And throughout the 4 days that we attended and we were staying in Sri Lanka, we met the most fantastic people, and it was absolutely humbling, as I say, and inspiring. But we did meet members of trade unions, community organisations, and more importantly, the workers. And workers who, in the main, I have to say, in the garment industry, were traditionally female workers who were living in conditions that I think were, again, I would say, very, very humbling. But many of these women were living in boarding houses which were bonded to the factories and the different employers, along with their children. But we also met workers from organisations who had been dismissed in atrocious situations, with strip searches, sexual harassments taking place, and huge litigation cases ongoing, where it was obviously really, really imperative that we went across to give support to the workers, support from War on Want, and to try and send out a strong message that we were not having the union busting that was going on, and to try and give our solidarity and encouragement to workers who were facing a huge crisis. And we know the economic situation in Sri Lanka at that time and as it continues. From a personal point of view, as I say, I was holding the position of president of the STUC at that time. And I think I felt that it was so important because we just came out of COVID. We were going through the cost of living crisis. We hadn't had the congresses face to face as we would normally. And the international agenda, I think, both in Scotland and the UK, had dissipated a bit. And so I felt it was really, really important that not only to attend, but having witnessed so many different conversations and situations with workers in there, that when I came back, I was determined not to just go over and say I've had that, visit. I wanted to bring it back, and I wanted to say, well, how can we as STUC General Council, but also affiliates within Scotland, how can we show our solidarity and support? And I'd like to think that we have actually done quite a lot in the 18 months really since I've came back. And part of that was providing a report to the officers of the STUC and the General Council, and really getting their 100% support to move things forward. And that really started with an international session at the Congress I presided over in Dundee in April 2023. Dave Moxham and others were instrumental in pulling that together, and we had guest speakers from organisations in Sri Lanka and different affiliates. And that was really important, I think, in highlighting what we were seeking from affiliates in supporting Sri Lanka and the workers. We also held at the STUC a roundtable event in September 2023 with the Joint General Secretary of the biggest trade union for workers in Sri Lanka, Anton Marcus, who continues to keep in touch with us. And from that, and this is where I think the Youth Committee, Josh, have got such an important role to play, because the Women's Committee and the STUC came on board because they recognise the high percentage of the females working in the garment industry. But they came on board. We had a motion to the STUC Women's Conference in 2023. But from that, that was all around how we can come together as a movement. And that is where I think the Youth Committee have got a massive role to play. And it really is, what's interesting for me is I'm still heavily involved with War on Want and the federations who send me information from Sri Lanka. And Linda opened tonight by speaking about recognising May Day and our continued struggles and coming together. And there was a massive issue going on in Sri Lanka throughout May, where there was a 75-day strike from the Sumitra strike workers, who are garment workers. 75 days they were out on strike against being pushed into a very low pay scale of under £3 a day, and really the eradication of labour laws, which gives them no voice. And if you don't have a voice, you don't have your dignity. And so it's absolutely fundamental that when they're out on strike, they need issues as straightforward as messages of solidarity, postings on social media, challenging and not boycotting brands, because I naively, when I went there, thought this was going to be about boycotting the brands and maybe discouraging so much online shopping on cheaper sites, etc., which again, I think, Josh, you'll know as well, in the youth demographics, there is a lot of people sitting ordering online every day. And I thought we were maybe going to take more action there. But when you think about it, if we start boycotting brands, we reduce the necessity for orders and we reduce the jobs and employment for those workers. So what we really are about is crying out for the brands to be more responsible for the terms and conditions of their workers, and demanding that they have a moral responsibility as well as a corporate responsibility. And we cannot lose sight of that. So we can be tackling these issues. And in the STUC and the motion from the STUC Women's Committee, what we're calling for is affiliates. We're looking at USDAW, GMB, Unite, looking at brands like Asda, Marks and Spencer's, Superdry, huge organisations that at this moment in time are complicit with really poor labour practices. So we've all got a role to do. And I say again, it doesn't need to be rocket science. It's us coming together, sharing information. And I really would love the STUC Youth Committee to come together with General Council and the Women's Committee to start posting, to start challenging, to start getting these messages out on social media. We have always had a proud tradition of a really active STUC Youth Committee. And I think when I was listening to Vijay, I can see the increase of the youth being political and having that trade union voice when we're out every week at the Palestinian rallies demanding a ceasefire. The ethnicity, the youth demographics has definitely accelerated, and that is our future, absolutely our future. So that's really just a quick overview, Linda, I think, of why I went to Sri Lanka, getting to Sri Lanka, what hopefully we've brought back, and what we as an STUC affiliates and committees can do to tackle, as I say, corporate responsibility, but even more moral responsibility. So happy to share anything I receive, Josh, with yourself or any other of the affiliates, and looking forward to standing with you shoulder to shoulder to take them on. Thank you. Thanks for giving me that opportunity tonight.
Thank you, Pauline. That was excellent. It was great to hear an overview of the work that's been done, and also some of the stuff you've been involved in personally. I think it's really good to hear that firsthand. And I know, you know, some of the issues in Sri Lanka as well, it's not just around, as you say, the labour laws or indeed exploitative contracts, but the political corruption across the country as well. I mean, as VG was pointing out, these are choices that are political choices that those in power make, and unless we can actually build enough power to change that, then that's, you know, that's our job, is to actually do that. So in Sri Lanka, the predominantly women workforce across the garment industries are subject to not some of those exploitative conditions from some of the employers, but also, as I say, a lack of protection and some of the most corruption that there is across the society, and particularly amongst politicians. So they've got their challenges, and certainly our solidarity is very, very welcome. So thank you, Pauline, for doing that. Colleagues, I just want to move on to our last speaker for this evening. Thank you to everyone who stayed with us for this event. I mean, we couldn't possibly think about putting together an international solidarity event at this point in time without, yet generally anyway, but particularly at this point in time, including a speaker on Palestine. The situation that we face and that we watch day in and day out, which somebody called recently, I think disturbingly but very accurately, a silent ambient genocide, and kind of background music to people's lives, is quite a horrifying but actually factually quite accurate description of the ambient genocide. What we do as trade unionists, how we build solidarity, what political activity we take part in. We all have different capacity and ability to do different things, but we all do what we can. And our trade unions have done that in many, many different ways, and not least the Fire Brigades Union. So with us tonight, we have from the FBU, Gus Sproul, who's going to talk to us a little bit about historically and what they're doing currently as well in terms of very practical support for Palestine. Gus.
Thank you, Linda, and thank you. Yeah, good evening, everyone, and thanks for asking us along. Like Josh, I'm quite humbled to be on the same platform as the speakers that have gone before me there. It's difficult to convince, you know, members in our union of the importance of internationalism and international solidarity, and to convince them that there's a world outside the station door. And like VG, I think that the youth are incredibly important in this, like you said as well, Pauline. And I really do think that you will help to shape and change the future. No, it's all on you, Josh. It's all on you, pressure. But I do like marches and the political pressure that you put in. It's really inspiring. So yeah, the FBU's got a long history of internationalism, and that continues today. I mean, just last week at our conference, we had really excellent, really moving contributions from speakers from Justice Columbia and from People Solidarity, which we're really proud to support. And we also had a really impassioned debate on the war in Gaza with numerous speakers at the rostrum voicing their, you know, horror and sadness at the situation. And you know, Vijay talked about emotions and anger and sickness, and it was really apparent that is felt certainly throughout our conference. And there was overwhelming support for our union's kind of policy statement on that and joining that international call for a ceasefire to try and begin to move towards peace. So yeah, our history of support for the Palestinian people goes back for decades to Ken Cameron, who in 1982 he tabled an emergency motion which condemned Israel's brutal invasion of Lebanon. At that time, recognised the national rights of the Palestinian people to self-determination within an independent sovereign state. And as far as I know, that was the first motion tabled criticising Israel that was ever brought to the TUC. Ken Cameron is also firm friends with the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa, and that relationship they had with Nelson Mandela led to Mandela becoming an honorary member of the FBU in 1990. And Mandela even wrote a personal letter of thanks to Ken Cameron when he retired from the FBU. And then Ken's sort of advocacy and support of the Palestinians and the cause remained with him until he passed in 2016. Jim Malone, a firefighter from Dundee, was one of those who shared Ken Cameron's commitment to the Palestinian people, and he's kind of driven forward that honourable legacy. So in 2009, the Scottish FBU brought 8 firefighters over from Dundee's twin city of Nablus, with the Scottish FBU continuing to lead various projects aimed at supporting Palestinian firefighters through training initiatives and delivery of firefighting kit and equipment. 2010 saw Tayside FBU send donations of firefighting kit to Gaza from Dundee, and in 2011 at the FBU's annual conference, then delegates donated funds to allow the purchase of 2 fire appliances by the Scottish FPU. The union then was working with the Scottish Parliamentary Cross-Party Group to assist with logistics and with contacts in the PGFTU, who also offered to allow the Dundee TUC to see off that convoy, and those appliances were driven 2,500 miles from Dundee to Nablus by FPU officials. One of those which was packed with fire kit and breathing apparatus, helmets, fire boots, cutting equipment, car crashes, was finally delivered to the Nablus municipality in December of that year, but only after being impounded by the Israeli authorities. And that appliance apparently still serves the people in Nablus and is still emblazoned with FPU Dundee to Nablus logo. Excuse me. From 2012 to 2013, there was a partnership between the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and the Palestinian Civil Defence, and they ran courses facilitated by the FPU, whose senior officers get modern management training in Dundee and in Glasgow. And then in 2014, at the request of the Palestinian Civil Defence, after a number of civilian fatalities, 2 courses in swiftwater rescue were delivered, with firefighters attending those in Cambuslang, and the practical sessions on the River Clyde and Loch Lomond. Then in 2015, Jim Malone went back to Palestine to assess the current requirements for Nablus, Ramallah, Hebron, and the PCD. And he was accompanied on that visit by the documentary filmmaker the FPU was with, Keith Gibbons, visiting the Palestinian communities throughout Palestine, and also into Israel and West Jerusalem. Kieran's FPU sponsored award-winning documentary Firefighters Under Occupation, been seen throughout the world, and anybody who hasn't seen it, look it up. It's on Vimeo. That was premiered in Dundee, it was shown in Palestine, and even Ken Loach gave the film kind of warm praise, saying that it gives a firefighter view on delivering humanitarian public service under military occupation. It's a really worthwhile watch. Again, the FPU are working hard, sourcing more PPE and firefighting equipment, and then packed a shipping container which left Dundee to Palestine in early 2017. That was again held up by the Israeli authorities, but eventually that made its way into Palestine, and again hundreds of fire kits, helmets, boots, and much needed medical kit and feeding apparatus was donated. The Scottish FPU also embarked on its support programme, again in partnership with the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service and the Scottish Government, who I have to say have been excellent throughout this, in the donating the fire appliances and facilitate or helping us facilitate the training at their training facilities, and with the Scottish Government and helping with visas for the Palestinian firefighters, which you can imagine was probably pretty difficult at their end. And so in 2019, a delegation from the FPU took another appliance over there and met with firefighters in Nablus and Hebron to hear their stories and help where they could. We've now got another fire appliance which is ready to go at the moment. There's been a bit of hold up with the refitting of it, as it needs to be moved to right-hand drive, so that the Israeli Defence Forces can shoot the driver should they need to at checkpoints. It's a difficult thing for any mechanics and sort of coach builders to do in Scotland, but the ever resourceful Palestinian firefighters have said that they can do that. But it's another kind of horrifying reminder of just what they face just trying to do their job. So, I mean, the FPU is now facilitate the training of over 100 Palestinian firefighters. 2009, we've delivered hundreds of breathing apparatus kits, fire kit, hoses, branches, cutting equipment, search and rescue equipment, medical equipment, and now 3 fire engines. I'll choose this next one over to 3 fire engines. It was sometimes you feel, I certainly felt kind of powerless and a bit helpless, and wonder if the actions that we take actually make a difference. But to hear at the STC Congress from a serving firefighter in Nablus saying how much it meant to them, to hear the message of support and solidarity from the trade union movement, and even for we launched our Firefighters Manifesto last December in London, and part of that presentation to the crowd there was a message of solidarity from a firefighter called Shams in Nablus, who, in the midst of what they were going through, took the time to kind of wish us all the best and send our solidarity in our pay campaign. So it's a really moving relationship we've got with the Palestinian firefighters, and something that I'm incredibly moved and proud to be doing anything I can to to continue on. So yeah, thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Gus, for outlining all of that, given, you know, that background to it, which not everybody would know. Everyone just kind of assumes it's something that's been around for a long time. But as you say, taking the initiative for somebody like Ken Cameron, who had a real vision of what international solidarity meant and how that could be practical support. And at the time, I'm sure that he would have been up against a lot of opposition. You know, there would have been people that said, this is not core to what you do as a trade unionist. This is not what we should be hearing. And that's something that we do get told in workplaces, working as a rep. You know, I know it was difficulty. I had my own union many, many years ago trying to get them to support Cuba Solidarity, because we were told that that was not of interest to workers. But actually, you know, you've got to have those arguments, back to what BJ was saying, know the education to it and be able to prepare to invest the time in discussing that with people until you build enough support that can actually change things, and change things in such a meaningful way, which is what the FPU have done. By taking over both practical solidarity and giving, you know, the training and equipment and getting people here to do that training. So a huge thanks to the FPU for doing that. I mean, the other thing I suppose it kind of talks about as well, when you've said, you know, it's education, and when we talk about what is political education, that education there that you've just discussed, Gus, for people both learning the story of the FPU and understanding why they've done it, and then the education you've taken to the Palestinian firefighters, you know, is beyond belief. And I think that the message of support that solidarity we got from the Palestinian firefighters that they sent to our Congress, imagining the conditions that they were doing that under at the time, again, for us, both very emotional, politically educating, but also immensely grateful to them for doing that. I mean, Josh, we've got a couple of minutes left, not to put you on the spot, but is there any reflections you've got about tonight's speakers, or very last words that you would want to give to all of our comrades that we've had online tonight?
Yeah, just again to thank all the speakers. I think that all the contributions have been wonderful, and hopefully give a bit of an insight into what international solidarity can and should look like. I think the picking up on the on a couple of the points that VJ was putting across on political education, and the importance of that. I think the SCC youth, we have had a bit of a focus on political education over the past sort of couple of years, helping form the SDC political education program, which has been running, but I'm told that that's been quite successful, and yeah, just that there's the vital importance of, you know, looking beyond just our borders. You know, we've got, you know, personally, I've got more in common with the working class person in Sri Lanka, Palestine, France, Italy, than I do a boss or a right wing politician in this country. And I think that just to sum up, that there is no power in this world that is that's more powerful, that can overcome a united, organised working class, and that becomes all the more powerful the more working class people from around the world that join that united front.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for those words of wisdom. Just to finish us off this evening, on a couple of points I would just want to make in conclusion. I mean, a huge thanks to all our speakers for taking the time, and for everyone else for joining us tonight for this international event, which actually was a truly international event, with VJ Joy joining us, as I say, from thousands of miles away. In terms of political education, I think we will have some courses on political education that will be coming up. We can also do some work with your unions around training people within the unions to take part in the political education courses and deliver them that we do. So if anyone's interested in that, then please do let us know. And in terms of international solidarity, something practical that we can all do is the STUC is working with Stop the War and other organisations for a national demonstration in support of Palestine and calling for a ceasefire on Saturday, the 15th of June. So I would like to hope that you will be there, that you'll promote it as best as you can in your own unions and branches and your own networks. So again, thanks tonight to everybody for joining us. Thank you to you all, and international solidarity. Greetings for the end of May as we reach the end of the May Day celebration month. Solidarity, comrades, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, Josh. Cheers.